All right. With all the jovial sounds in the room, I'm sure we'll have a wonderful back end of this session for regional services. If I may, I'll call the meeting back to order. All right. Feels like we're almost in order. So we were on R11. Do we want to redo the presentation, get ourselves back up to speed, or are we good to continue? All right. So I apologize. I try and check off my speakers on the speakers list. I believe that we did conclude the speakers list, but I didn't check off the last two names. But if we'd like to have some more discussion on R11, again, we're going to go back to R10 after we've done R11. I would take questions from the committee, and if not, we do have resolutions there. So if I see hands for some more discussion before the resolutions get read off by Mr. Barry, I'll take those now. And if not, I'll ask Mr. Barry to read the resolutions. R11.
Separate.
Yeah, and we would do them separately.
So the recommendation, Mr. Chair, that it be recommended to the board that the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program 2019 work plan attached to the Environmental Services Division's January 14th, 2019 staff report be approved.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. Do we have a mover and seconder? Moved by Director Sebring. Was that seconded by Director Smith? Thank you. Discussion on the motion. Director Sebring.
Not to reopen a whole can of worms, but based on the discussion we had this morning, I'm a little unclear now as to whether this motion and this work plan includes or does not include funding for the Shawnigan Watershed Basin for this year.
So I'll let staff answer that question because Director Kuhn advised me that staff should provide that information. But I would say no. It was an electoral area services budget where it lived before, and it would need to continue to live there, and that would be a discussion for electoral area services.
That's correct. So if I may, this staff report really talks about kind of the direction that we're going in, some broader recommendations with regards to other functions and activities, but it speaks specifically to a preamble to the 131 budget and the new drinking water and watershed protection budget, not the grant and aid, nor the South Cowichan water study budget.
Thank you. I've got Director Nicholson and then Director Acton.
So I would like to see some changes to the watershed planning thing. And I think, I'm not quite sure because whether it's better just to deal with it through the budget part or through this, because I fundamentally think that there's a problem with what's being proposed. And I think that one of the ways you can tell that there's a problem is that building partnerships is number 2 on the key steps in watershed planning. And so I would, I really think we need to pause and think this through carefully, and it's very difficult to do this in this kind of a forum, obviously. But I'm not comfortable with it. Yeah, so I need some help on this because there's a sort of a this kind of sets it up for the budget, but you could make some changes to the budget and maybe get where you want it to get. But I really feel that the most important thing is building that partnership thing at the front end and using the partnership to develop the plan.
Ms. Miller?
And I really think that we need to develop some technical credibility and trust out in the community that they're going to be listened to and that they'll be supported technically. And I think that it's a mistake to do any more program dollars until you have the discussions about what's important. And I think we need to incorporate a larger chunk of the budget towards the community groups, including the Cowichan Watershed Board partnership.
Ms. Miller?
Thank you. Through you to the directors, the key steps that are outlined and have a number to them, there is no inference of importance over the other. We've certainly identified, you know, a number of key steps in the program development over time. The work plan that we're proposing identifies a very high priority of working with our partners. It's clearly stated. We've specifically asked for funding and external support in doing that effectively. And so that's a component there. In addition, speaking to the issue of professional capacity, as kind of laid out during the presentation, the existing staffing and capacity within this division is very small. We have a very broad group of functions under us, and we are clearly suggesting that there needs to be capacity. Do we hire staff before a plan is developed and priorities are developed, or is that in line with recognizing the input from a variety of actors about what the best steps forward are? The other reality check is that we know that HR is at capacity. If we had approval right now, we wouldn't have a person in that seat for quite some time. We want to make sure that we get the right person or people, that they have the right skills. We've already communicated to this group and to the public that we see that being both technical skills as well as communication and facilitation skills. So that's the objective. So that the strategy's laid out. We are not inferring that the watershed characterization trumps partnership development.
Thank you. Director Nicholson?
I look at the priority actions, and I don't see in the 4 bullets there the kind of community involvement that I think we need. This program can only happen successfully and be delivered, all the work that needs to be done, if we get the community working with us, or we work with the community. And I don't see that in this. I see a technical advisory committee putting in place a plan, and then they're dissolved, and then the CVRD goes away and does its thing. And that is not what we should be doing, and that is not the way the Cowichan Watershed Board works, and I think we should take, what's the expression? A leaf out of their whatever, feather out of their cap or whatever.
Okay, I appreciate the comments for sure. Mr. Carruthers, you'd like to comment?
Yeah, I think Director Nicholson actually is consistent with what we're proposing. I think we're maybe getting hung up on the term, Technical Advisory Committee. That was the best choice of words that we used. We really saw this committee as being representative of the various stakeholder groups, our utility operators in our region, the same folks that we went out and engaged with as we were developing this service. Who have a stake in the community and represent various constituents, various sectors of the community, as well as our municipal partners. So it would be a broad-ranging membership. Part of this work plan is to come back with that terms of reference, so the committee will have another opportunity to look to make sure we got it right in terms of who we're proposing to sit on that committee. It would be a time-limited exercise to develop some recommendations to the board around a work plan, but also develop what the future of that type of committee would look like moving forward. So I think the recommendation that staff are making, in our view, is consistent with what Director Nicholson is trying to achieve. I think we might just be using some different terminology, but it was certainly our intent, and we said it from the beginning, that we couldn't do this alone, and we did not want to enter into this service just having it being a CVRD function and that we would carry on, and that's why we've asked for the funds to have a proper facilitator come in, work with us so that we're not being seen as driving this, that we're participants just like the rest of our partners, and that we will come up with a fulsome recommendation from the board. So, and then there's, like I said, there'll be opportunity for this committee to have another look at that membership to make sure that it's reflective of who would want to be getting input from.
Thank you, Mr. Carruthers. I'll go through the speakers list, and then, you know, if there's a necessity to speak again, I'll provide that opportunity. I've got Directors Acton, Marsh, Kuhn, and Morrison. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From the time that it was at 750, we were very clear with the community and with the public that $60,000 was going to be for NGOs. And we were also very clear that the Shawnee Basin Society was in that number, because they came back here several times saying that number's not enough, and we realized that Shawnigan does not want to pay twice. This is putting Area B paying twice. The $50,000 just paid by Area B is equivalent to $500,000 requisition. And we did not tell the public. I was at those public meetings in the South, and no one said, yes, you're going to pay, now you're paying twice. That was not the intention for this requisition, to do that. So, sure, you can comment, and funding for the Basin Society should come out of this function.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to be clear on
Brothers.
what, because I was the primary spokesperson for this, so I'm pretty clear on what I was messaging to the community. I was clear that that was not a decision that was being made at this time with regard to those other services, that those would be decisions that the board would have to make moving forward. There was no commitments made one way or another whether those services would exist or not exist. People asked, and I was very clear that the status of those services would be up to the board in the future. And as I had said earlier as well, there were I look at them potentially as opportunities for the community, that there's only so much money in the watershed service to go around. It's not going to be able to satisfy everybody's needs. And those communities that have an existing service have the opportunity to leverage those funds to do more than what the Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Service may be able to provide to them. So although it may be conceived as double dipping or double paying, it is really about having capacity to deal with issues. And this is, this is a recommendation based on what we had put forward in the draft budget. If it's the desire of the committee to increase that allocation within the budget to fund other groups at this time, this is your budget, and you can make that recommendation. But I just wanted to be clear on what I believe I had messaged to the community, that we were making no commitments about those other services, and that would be a decision that would be made by the board at some time in the future.
Thank you. I'll go through the speakers list. I do have some comments, but I'll reserve my comments till the end. Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to comment a bit about the issue that Director Acton and the CAO were just talking about. I really got the difference today when Mr. Carruthers said that the funding of the Watershed Board, we're partners with them. We actually have this document, the management plan, I think it's called, the governance manual of the Cowichan Watershed Board. So I see that as a very different thing. And I don't want to upset anybody, but I do. I see it as a very different thing than the Shawnigan Basin Society. Quamachin Lake has the Quamachin Lake Stewardship Group. Are we going to give them $50,000 to do their work? No, we're not. If we begin to do that out of this $750,000, I would think there would be many other local watershed groups that would be wanting to pony up for the funding as well. I spoke to Mr. Rutherford yesterday at the gathering at the Elders' House, Elders' Place, and I asked him, because I was hearing that people were concerned there was only $60,000 in the budget given to external groups. And I said, well, if that's how it goes, how it is, couldn't you kind of all get together and work together and leverage some money? And he said to me, well, actually, they have a loosely formed coalition of these watershed tables, and they meet, and they're working together. So I think what I really wanted to talk about was a bit more about where I think Director Nicholson was coming from. I think that, and if you can tell me that this is what the intent of this is, I'm comfortable with the thing. Because I'm getting it's not really a question of either or. The CVRD does this and the outside group does that. It's somehow we're going to come up with a strategic framework that would meld what the CVRD does and what the outside groups do, and allow each of them to play to their strengths, and through working together. Would that be fair enough? And that So the internal capacity of the CBRD is really well placed to coordination and prioritization between the watersheds and to provide resources for specific technical expertise as needed. And the watershed groups have a very high level of knowledge regarding their particular watersheds, and they can provide extremely valuable insights and perspectives, as well as what I think is key is what Director Nicholson is saying is the ability to get the community buy-in and to do the work on the ground. And I think we really saw that through the housing function. It's just amazing how many nonprofits got together and the buy-in from the community. And I think that in spite of a lot of negative and untrue things that were said about that function, it still passed because there was so many people on the ground that were so interested in it. So I think the trick to success will be in how do we implement that vision. And the communities that are in question are really key. And so I think maybe I feel a little uneasy about the term technical working group or whatever it is too, but if is that what basically what I've said is kind of the intention, then I think we're good. So I can support things as they are. I wish we had the funds to support all these different groups, but we don't have any oversight over what they're actually doing, and we don't know if what they're doing is a priority. And I think that we need to develop a plan and know and how to bring them together into the table. And I think that's what this group will help us do.
Mr. Carruthers?
Essentially, what Director Marsh said is absolutely the intent. Additionally, that it would be around prioritizing where the effort needs to be spent. With $750,000 to potentially address a number of issues across the entire region, it's going to be really important that we, as a community, prioritize where those efforts need to be spent. The role of the CVRDIC is being coordinating. It was very clear that we can't do this alone, but it's also very clear that somebody needs to coordinate. Somebody needs to be taking the lead role in coordinating, setting the standards, the warehousing the data, all of that kind of stuff, which is certainly a role that the CVRD can play. But this work plan and the future of this service, which is a very important service, needs to be developed jointly with our partners. We just simply can't do it alone. So what you said earlier is absolutely the case.
Yeah, follow up?
Just follow up just to say, I think, again, the key, and I appreciate hearing from Ms. Miller, is hiring someone for our position that has technical expertise and, even more important, the ability to facilitate and communicate and bring people together. Because without that, if the face of the CVRD with those other groups doesn't have that skill, then things won't go as well. So I feel comfortable hearing that. So thank you.
Thank you. Director Kuhn.
Well, I have a different view of this whole thing, as you might sense. I don't like the function to start with, and I'm going to vote against it. But if the function goes through, I am not in favor of supporting NGOs out of that pot of money. And I'll give you the reasoning for that. Under normal circumstances, if an NGO or an outside agency wants to apply for funding, they can do that through granting aids, or they can apply for a function. If that happens, the board always has control as to how much money should be dispersed. They have to justify their spending, and at any time can the board then decide, well, we'll reduce the amount, or we have control over it. If this function includes disbursements of funds to NGOs, the control is gone. It will be gone, and I'll tell you why, because there will be staff recommendations that will come up and will say, well, we want to support this and this NGOs with so much money, and are you all in favor? And it will be a whole different view of this operation than if it comes independently as an application. I know how things work. Staff come up with a recommendation. We need this, and this has to be done. And I know sooner or later the board will fall into place, and yeah, okay, we'll go for it. And so I would be much more in favor if this was all branched out and we say, okay, fine, you want funding, you apply independently, and then we'll decide if you can get it. Because then we can make it performance-based. If it is just all into one pot, how do you keep it apart, and how do you assess then which one has done a good job, which one hasn't, and then there's the expectation. I've already heard it from the Cowichan Lake and River Stewardship Society. They're determined to get funding out of that, and they're sure it was indicated to them that they'll get funding. So you'll get pressure groups coming in, and they want funding, and they're not doing it through the normal way of doing it, and that is to apply for a separate function or to apply for a grant in aid. And I just don't like to put everything into a pot and then the whole pot gets decided as one item, because we do lose control over the money. And that's something I really like. I like control over funding. And if something doesn't work properly, at any point can we say, no, sorry, we'll reduce the amount, or you won't get it this year, or whatever. If it's all in a pot, yeah, let's do it. And I'm not in favor of that.
Thank you. Mr. Carruthers.
So I might have something that might help alleviate Director Kuhn's concerns. One of the functions we saw of this advisory group would be to establish the criteria around who would get grants and talk about that kind of a process. I will suggest to you as a committee and as a board, you have absolute control at all times of the money that you give out. You have the ability to put funding agreements in place. You have the ability to review, alter, cancel funding to groups at any time. So it's really about the process that we put in place. And as I said in Ms. Miller's presentation, that was one of the functions of this advisory group, was to make recommendations to this board around how those funds would be allocated and what criteria would be used, as opposed to staff coming forward. We don't want to be in that position. That's not anything that we want to do. If a group wants to make a presentation to some committee in the future, or there's some other mechanism, but we would see it being a more open and transparent process than just simply staff coming forward with a recommendation.
Thank you. I've got Directors Morrison, then Smith. Where's the rest of my list here? Staples. And I just wanted to make a comment before we get too far, because it was related to that piece, if it's okay, Director Morrison. The Cowichan Valley North Watershed Stewardship Group as well, which functions in Stocking Lake, Holland Creek or Holland Lake area, and the Ladysmith Saltaire watersheds, as well as seems to be turning their attention north to North Oyster and Yellow Point, also have some objectives that they want to see accomplished. So I think that the comments are well taken by Director Kuhn, that that's a scope creep that I'm not comfortable with, but I do have confidence that the board will exercise that control, because I think we've all expressed some concerns around using that regional funding into little pockets within the district without having a holistic view of it. So I'll go back to the speakers list. Director Morrison, then Smith, then Staples, and Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just got a few comments, and firstly, I think I've been to all but one of the Cowichan Lake and River Stewardship Society meetings over the last year, and to my memory, I don't recall them getting any CVRD funds since their formation, and I haven't heard of them planning to make requests to this new function. And so when last board came up with a $750,000 number, which left a $50,000-$60,000 for ENGOs, I knew they'd be just fine, because they've been functioning just fine all along without taxpayer dollars in support. I think it's important that, this watershed function referendum passed, and I went to all of the pre-consultation engagement meetings and all the post once we had the number and the function and everything together, and I heard I heard in my friend Director Marcotte's area, water was a big concern. And so this is something that I think our communities are really important, or think are really important. But it was really interesting at those meetings where there was that debate about, you know, what exactly are you going to do with this money? And staff were very clear that we didn't have a to the dollar budget in place. We didn't know whether or not the function would be approved. So there was faith from our electorate to go forward. Here's the money, now put the best plan in place. And I say that because this was approved on that basis. And now what I've seen in all of this documentation, in my mind, are some very cautious first tentative steps to put something in place that will last a while, a good long while, I hope. And I think staff have already begun to have those meetings to reach out to other groups. So I'm looking at this thinking, okay, well, it was approved without a very specific plan. Staff are putting together, bringing their best practices and information to bear on a fairly straightforward path forward. And I'm reluctant to get the political fingers into the pie. And I just know that there's been so much time and effort and energy put into this, and I didn't see anything that jumped out of off the screen that caused me alarm. It looks like this is a plodding, methodical, thoughtful approach to bringing this function into existence and to begin to fund some of the activities that we talked about in this function. And I'll say this as well, because earlier, I guess it was this meeting, but this morning, I think it was Director Wilson had said that, you know, make sure we're not just stopping everything else while we get get this up and running and get the work done. So I'm pretty comfortable with what our professional staff have put forward as a plan, and I don't see the red flags that would say, oh, wait a minute, but that's wrong. And I don't know how much more we should be trying to influence this when I think it's a reasonable plan. It may not be the best plan for each and every one of us, but it's reasonable. And I think we could probably move forward on this because they've told us they're going to come back. They're going to bring the recommendations and the criteria and the membership, and all of that's going to come back to us. So I'd say let's move forward. Let's have some faith, the same sort of faith that our electorate had when they said, yep, go ahead and do this, and put some of these things in place so that they can start their work. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Morrison. Director Smith.
Thank you. I applaud the Shawnigan Lake Basin for stepping forward at a time when others were not stepping forward to take on an action and look at funding, and they went to their taxpayers, and the taxpayers came up with an alternate approval process, and they agreed to collect on their taxes every year for a specific work on the Shawnigan Basin area, and they've done an amazing job. They have many talented people. For me, I have a question regarding the Cowichan Watershed Board. Does the Watershed Board have a legal agreement with the CVRD for funding? And I would also like to know, why has there not been any alternate approval process put together for the Cowichan Watershed Board to be funded as the Shawnigan Lake Basin has been done? Because the areas that are impacted, that the work that is being done by the Cowichan Watershed Board is for specific areas in the CVRD. It doesn't relate to other areas. It doesn't relate to North Cowichan Bonsall area. It doesn't relate to the watersheds up in Ladysmith, Saltaire, and out at Area H, those areas. So can someone please answer if there is a legal agreement and if, and why there has not been a process where the Cowichan Watershed Board had an exact funding that became a service.
Through to Mr. Crothers.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, we do have a funding agreement with Cowichan Watershed Board, and they're required to report out on their expenditures. As to why there is not a service, I can't speak to that. The Cowichan Watershed Board's been in place for 10 years, long before I got here. The board of the day when they created it, it was a partnership agreement with the Cowichan Watershed Board. I can't speak to the issue of an AAP or a service.
So if I may provide clarity, though, on the requirement to establish the service, because it was funded through the 131 service, which was a function that was established through the proper procedures to establish a service. There was a service established that has that funding flow through, but it wasn't a specific service to the Cowichan Watershed Board.
That's correct.
Yeah, and Ms. Miller, do you have anything to add to that, or is that?
I think, things evolve over time somewhat organically. The Cowichan Water Management Plan, with the 89 recommendations, laid out a whole series of logical actions by both the CVRD and other players. At that time, CVRD recognized that it would take some resources, staff resources, to support those actions. So there was a line item put into the 131 budget to underwrite the expenses of the organization in supporting the new board. That's morphed over time into a direct support. We recognize that that wasn't really in line with what the public's expectation of the 131 budget was, or the function, which is why we say it's kind of outgrown that mechanism, and we specifically added it in as one of the components of this new bylaw.
Thank you. I'll go back to Director Smith, and then I'll add Directors Nicholson and Marsh to it in my speakers list.
So since then, the funding has been coming out of 131 for the Cowichan Watershed Board. All the CVRD areas have been paying for the Watershed Board partnership. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
And that was a decision of the board at the
Yeah,
time to
I just
authorize that expenditure, so.
Kinda
Yep.
correlate the
Yeah,
funding and where it's come from. So one more, so
Yep.
is there an agreement in that partnership document stating that the CVRD is to fund the Watershed Board?
Not explicitly in that function, but again, the board within the function during budget times like this has authorization to make allocations from that budget to work with NGOs if they wish, and those were the decisions of the board of the day, and those decisions have been upheld by subsequent boards to this point anyway. Okay, so I've got Director Staples, Nicholson, and then Marsh.
There just feels like there's too many directions to take this right now in terms of listening to everyone around the table and all the things that are going through my mind about this, because it's both simple in what's being asked in a way. We're being asked to develop a work plan and for staff to be given a year transition time, and for everyone involved so far in different watersheds to be given that year so that we can come up with something. And that seems really reasonable to me, to give that time frame for everyone that's involved. For all the people that have been, working towards getting this here. Don't forget, the Watershed Board started because our community had a crisis. That's why it started. We were trucking fish up the river, which we still have to do because of drought conditions. So this is something that is not going to ease up on our communities anytime soon. And the fact that we're at this place and now taking the time to establish a way forward and to do this with community partners. And Allison, Director Nicholson, I completely understand where you're coming from. And at the same time, based on the experience and the history that this board and that this department has had with the Watershed Board, I have faith from what I'm seeing, and I'm generally not one to give faith to a lot of things, but in terms of, and I don't like the word stakeholder, I have to say, for this technical group, that is to me one of the most disrespectful words that we can use in terms of language. But the way that the people that are being, it's people, groups, organizations, agencies, individuals, so that we have a holistic management that adequately addresses all watershed concerns. That's right in the report, in the recommendations. The only thing that I would like to see added to that is, and to remember the model of the watershed board, that there is some sort of, whoever it is that's hired to facilitate this process, that there's a co-leadership developed for this process too with First Nations. I don't, like that this includes First Nations that's tagged on to this, because we've demonstrated something here, as we witnessed yesterday, that we're doing differently. And why not use this process as another example of how we can build this plan forward differently? Thank you.
Thank you. Good comments. Director Staples, moving on. Director Nicholson, then Marsh, and then I will add a few comments as well that I was reserving till the end, and I just keep bumping them back. Director Nicholson.
I just wanted to add for Director Smith's, based on Director Smith's question, the Cowichan River, as Director Staples pointed out, was in crisis. And it isn't a regionally significant watershed. The whole region benefits from the health of that watershed. And, it supplies water to Crofton Mill. And so it's not like just Bonsall Creek, right? And I think that needs to be taken into account.
Thank you. Director Marsh.
I know it's really hard to remember everything that we hear in a day, so I just wanted to read a paragraph that I think was laid out, maybe not exactly everything in this paragraph, and this is yesterday when Mr. Rutherford was talking about the history of the Watershed Board. So this is from the governance manual. The Cowichan Watershed Board was jointly established in 2010 by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, the Ministry of the Environment, CBRD, and Cowichan Tribes, with the support of the Living Rivers Trust Fund and Catalyst Paper, and is accountable to the government partners. So it seems like it's a bit, not just the partnership between us and the First Nations, but it's a pretty wide-ranging partnership. And so, to me, it should continue to be funded, and it makes sense since we're looking at this new function, that without going through a bunch. What? Oh, I thought you were telling me to do something about my thing. I'm always doing something wrong with this, so that's why it just makes sense to me that they would be the first one. We don't really need to debate should they be, I don't think, funded under this. Down the road, maybe we'll add other groups, but to me, this one, and I also learned yesterday they've leveraged our money like over and over and over. I think last year into 300,000 or something like that. So anyway, that's all I want to say. I hope we can call the question soon and move on.
I'll go to Director Smith, and then hopefully I can call the question. Director Smith.
Through the chair to Director Nicholson, I value what the Cowichan Watershed Board has done, and I've had Tom Rutherford come to my house to give us direction on how the Watershed Board was formed and the society, because we would like to look at the model that was put in place. As a new director, some of the financial understanding, I just am asking for clarification. So I do value all the work that's been done. I think that the Cowichan River is very important, and the work that they do is extremely important.
Thank you. So that's a perfect segue. So I'm glad you put your hand up, Director Smith, because that's a comment I wanted to make. I remember when I joined this board 4 short years ago, I had the same questions when I realized that the Cowichan Watershed Board was a regionally funded function. Then I got to know more about the status of the Cowichan River and the importance not only to the people in the Cowichan River area, but to our region as a whole. The Cowichan River is a heritage river recognized in Canada as one of the most significant systems, especially on Vancouver Island. And when we had this conversation about the funding model moving into the drinking water protection or drinking water and watershed protection service, the comfort level I have due to their leadership qualities and the model that they've created that will be instructive to the board and to our other stewardship groups in finding a proper governance model moving forward for this initiative, I think is of paramount importance. And therefore, I'm quite comfortable funding for this year especially, that allocation to come from that function for all of us to contribute regionally, because I don't think there's a better partner that we can have to help us develop a good model for governance in all of our watersheds moving forward. And I think that the leadership they've shown will serve our coalition of watershed groups quite well. In no way, I think at one point I thought, ooh, wow, they can take on all the watersheds. That would be completely unfair and inappropriate, but what I think they can do is use their experience and their governance model to help us work with the coalition of watershed groups that came to our board and presented not too long ago around how we would form a group, whether it's a round table or something that would be able to provide meaningful technical and on-the-ground information to the board to make good decisions, especially as we move forward into next year. So the other piece that struck me too was, because it's kind of bothered me as well, was how we relate to funding NGOs or community partners to do some of this on-the-ground work. And I would always say that as a board, it's up to us to set the expectation that we expect specific deliverables for every dollar that we expend within this function. And through this year of discovery, if you will, and engagement, that'll help us find out how we instruct those groups to provide those specific deliverables. And as Director Kuhn had said, if they do not satisfy those requirements, the payments would not be forthcoming, and or they likely wouldn't get funded again through that function. So I'm comfortable with those levels, and as much as there's some semantics on wording and things like that, I will say the final piece that I have is the importance of our First Nation partners throughout the region, from Staminas in the north to Malahat in the south to Subasset and Dididat and the other First Nations that are bordering and within our area, whether we're talking about Nitinack, Cowichan Lake, Holland Lake, Shawnigan Lake. As we move forward, and I'm hoping for 2020 and beyond, we have a good model to be able to engage all of those groups, and especially our First Nations. So I do think that Director Staples made an excellent comment around the First Nations piece needing to be a core component, not an add-on at the end. And I know that that was never intended, but if you read through it, it can come off that way if you're looking at it through a different lens. I don't have any more questions or hands up, so I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Directors Nicholson and Kuhn and Marcotte opposed. The motion passes. So we'll go back to Mr. Barry for part two.
Lynn had her hand up too.
Oh, sorry?
Lynn, you gotta go like this.
Okay, sorry, Lynn. Yes, please. So, and Director Smith opposed.
The second recommendation, that a report be prepared regarding the establishment of a Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program Advisory Select Committee. You'll decide on that name at the time the report comes back, perhaps. To provide input to the 2020-2030 Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program development. As you can tell by the resolution, that's worded that it will come back to this committee before it gets sent to the board for creation. So you'll have an attempt to take a look at, or you'll have an opportunity to look at what comes forward from staff.
Thank you. So we removed the word technical from it to be a broader perspective. It's been moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Marsh. Discussion on that. I think we've discussed it well, but I'll go to Director Nicholson.
I think it's really important that there's a clear community engagement process articulated, and how that is going to work with this select committee, or whatever it is going to be called.
Thank you. So through to staff.
I don't think that my point is, I don't think that we should rely on this technical committee to be our community engagement thing.
No,
That's
no.
not enough.
Okay, that will be a decision of the board, and we always appreciate your perspective and the perspective of every director, but that will be a decision of the board at the time. Staff can take that under advisement when it comes back. And I would hope, and I would just make a suggestion if I can follow along, that whatever agenda that comes back to us on, that we have sufficient time to work on crafting it and having, I would suggest, workshopping it a little bit at committee level before we make any decisions, but that will be our prerogative at the time. So that has been moved and seconded. I don't have any more speakers on my list. I'll call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? Directors Kuhn, Smith, opposed, and Marcotte opposed. Please put your hands out. If they're behind your neighbor, I can't see them. Thank you. The resolution passes. Now, I believe we were going to go back to R10, Mr. Barry.
Correct. So R10 is the draft budget review for Function 131, Environmental Initiatives.
So I don't have any hands for questions early on. I'll get Mr. Barry to read the resolution.
That Function 131, Environmental Initiatives 2019 draft budget be approved.
And that's been moved by Director Staples, seconded by Director Marsh. And speaking to the item, Director Acton?
So the new watershed functions plan was to take some of those funds that were being spent out of 131 and put into the new watershed function. Could you point those out? Where that's
So on the first page of the report, salaries and benefits decreased by $31,297. Cowichan Watershed funding decreased from $50,000 to zero. Telephone information technology decreased by $5,203. Do you want to maybe provide some insight into those numbers?
If I may, so the issue with the salaries and benefit decrease, because the 131 function has a staff allowance with it of 3 full-time folks. However, the budget over time has eroded, and so it actually provides staffing to the other functions within the environmental services bundle. And so there is a decrease this year to staffing that is paid for under this function because we are moving into a ramping up of both the Cowichan floodplain function or the flood management function that requires staff time. It also is an increase to staff time to the South Sector Liquid Waste Management Plan. And so it's because all of these budgets are integrated with regards to shared staffing load. It is not a decrease of staffing because we're moving it to the new proposed function.
It's allocations.
It's allocations increase, it's
So
allocation to other
just for
programs.
clarity, because I think it might shape the discussion a bit, we have these other functions, central liquid waste management. Some of these budget item and environmental initiatives are actually allocations to those other functions?
And it's complex, and I know, I don't know if you've seen the 575 budget. So basically, within that budget, staff time is allocated to other functions. The environmental services group provides the staff to those other functions, and as those other functions require more staff time, you know, there's only 3 people, so you reduce the cost over here and you increase it over here.
Thank you.
Right. So with this new function, we are not what the prior recommendation was, that the work under the 131 budget for the water bundle, that staff time be reallocated to the climate bundle. We are not reducing the requisition, increasing it here and reducing it there.
Thank you. Director Acton, follow-up?
Well, what I distinctly remember is for you saying that there's $400,000 from 2018 that was spent on watershed function items that was coming out of 131, and that would come out of this new watershed function.
In 2018, the board approved roughly $50,000 to be spent on watershed-based programs. So that's a risk assessment, and that's the development of an environmentally sensitive areas process. So we've done initial mapping. The residual of that money was from grant money from the National Disaster Mitigation Program. So that roughly $400,000, almost $600,000 was spent under that program through the 131 budget. So it's not requisition dollars.
Sorry, I wonder if maybe finance
I think
is.
maybe forget the 131. We were told that you have been able to, it was suggested to go to referendum to create this new function because there was $400,000 that we were able to pull from maybe different functions then. And that was doing watershed work that we had to clean it up and put it all together in this new function.
Sorry.
I'm curious, like, what are those items in here?
Okay,
that came out. That came out and went across to this new function.
You're saying 400,000 of the new function would be taken up by allocations moving from this budget, from other departments? No, I'm just trying to recall, you said you recall distinctly, I was trying to get some clarity.
That work was, so environmental services was doing work on watershed items. So even though there was no real function to do it. So we were taking money out of different areas and doing watershed work. And so that was presented for a reason to have a new watershed function.
Maybe,
Sorry, Mr. Carruthers.
yeah, maybe I can take a stab at this. So I think Kate, or Ms. Miller just explained that there was $50,000 allocated in 131 to deal with watershed-related work. The other expenditures were grant dollars. They weren't requisition dollars. They were grants that we had leveraged through the National, Disaster Mitigation Program. So there's not $400,000 in watershed program work in 131 going to the new service. That isn't what's happening. What you'll see in staffing is there's an allocation of Ms. Miller's time and Mr. Hatami's time, because now that new service falls under the Engineering Services Department, so we have to allocate, obviously, appropriate percentage of oversight, but there's not a lot of direct costs from Environment 131 going into the drinking water and watershed protection. Ms. Miller had just said that some of those water-related activities have been actually moved into the climate bundle of activities under 131.
Thank you. Director Nicholson, then Smith.
The 160,000, is that flood management covered by a grant? Is the floodplain management covered by a grant?
Yes, it is. That's the NDMP program as a line item.
Thank you. Director Smith.
Thank you. I see that there's a partnership project, 50,000. What type of partnership project would that be?
Through to Ms. Miller.
If I may, that's a great question. We respond and we actively go after specific grants to support a lot of our work where we don't have internal funding. Most of those grants require a in-kind contribution or a percentage. So typically it's 1/3 or 50%. This is money that allows us to have that in hand to leverage potential grants. So we used that last year for the structured decision-making model process and leveraged until such time as we could find additional partners, and then the money went back into our reserve.
So I just created a follow-up for me. So if those funds are not expended on grant opportunities, then they would roll into the reserve. Thank you. I don't have anyone else on my list. Mr. Bear, have we had it moved and seconded? Yes. It's been a while. I can't quite remember. Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Directors Smith and Kuhn opposed. The resolution passes. Now we're back hopping forward to R12.
Which is the draft budget for Function 532, Drinking Water and Watershed Protection.
Thank you. So we have discussed the functions work plan in detail, and the budget aligns with the work plan, so I would contend that this would be less discussion required unless we want to relitigate. Director Nicholson.
Of course I'll want to repeat myself over and over again. I remain concerned about the proposed spending on programmatic things like the hydrometric, where did I write it down? It isn't clear in this report what kind of commitment we're making then to the long-term spending of this function, right? So we know that when we do a lot of the watershed monitoring work that needs to be done, you got to keep on it. It takes, once you commit to putting in wells and monitoring them, it takes resources and so forth. So I just feel uncomfortable with us going ahead until we have a plan in place that the community can support. And
Thank
I
you.
think it just flies in the face of being open and to working with the community. It just, to me, does not is not good process.
Thank you. Would staff like to comment? You know, I understand there's some carts and horses we need to line up here, so maybe you can speak to us around timing and lining with the engagement process, or if you have any feedback.
Sure. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to comment on it. The primary programs that we're anticipating moving forward, given the language that we used at the community level around water quality and water quantity, we know that there are issues. We know certainly through our work on the Fisher Road area that we need to collect data more efficiently. We're in negotiations with the province around two objectives. One is aligning our software with the provincial software so that we can leverage it more effectively. And the other is around data sharing and bringing forward a lot of the data that's been collected in the past. So some cost here in terms of software packages, uploading of the data, and working with the community, either through a fee-for-service or through a consulting arrangement, to develop the first phase of the sort of the planning process around water quality data collection programs in the future. So right now we've got data collection and water quality objectives established for various watersheds. They're all at various stages of completion. We do not have the staff time using our existing capacity to really complete that work. So this is a process that we're proposing. For example, in the hydrometric and climatic monitoring, we have a snow pillow station. It makes sense to have this function pay for that snow pillow station. We've identified needs in some of our region, the Cook-Sila being a priority area, where we need additional groundwater monitoring and flume monitoring. Should we wait 2 years to do that, or can we do it this year? And I would argue that early investment in infrastructure is a very good investment, in particular in this first year where we do not have the load of allocations against the program. We've got more capacity.
Thank you. Director Nicholson, follow-up.
I thought the $15,000 for the snow pillow was under the previous function that we just approved.
Ms. Miller.
The budget for the previous function was approved prior to the referendum going forward. We've also got other functions that are linked with it, and so we estimate or assume that that budget will be adjusted before the final reading of this committee in February.
Thank you.
So,
So another
okay,
follow-up.
okay, well, I
Director
just need
Nicholson.
clarification on what is being considered climate change programs and what is being considered water. I mean, I can only go with what I've got in front of me here.
I can't provide that
Yeah,
insight.
if I
so-
may, that's part of the discussion that would happen over the 2019 period about how we lump or slice and dice these various programs. They're all highly integrated, but we know, however, that we need information specifically related to water supply, and that particular element provides key information for the management of the lake.
Thank you. And Director Nicholson, I'll provide you another follow-up before I resume the speakers list. And I can always come back to you at the end, but
Okay,
go ahead.
I would just like to repeat that $750,000 is not a lot of money. There are a lot of things that we need to do, as Ms. Miller has pointed out. It seems prudent that we get a plan in place that everyone can agree upon, so that it's open and transparent, and making these commitments is eating up the budget, so by the time you develop your plan, there won't be very much left. And
Thank
I
you.
don't think that's good process.
Thank you. I would contend conversely that the allocation of existing resources from environmental initiatives that are to do with watershed management and planning would be an appropriate use of some of those resources, and I think that's what's proposed. So snow pillows monitor the snow to help us predict the impacts of climate change as well as the flows expected into our watersheds. So as that example goes, from my perspective, that's a suitable place to allocate it from, but we're all open to differences of opinion. I have Directors Wilson and Morrison, and we can go around again. Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You've got a line item there of grant in aid of $60,000. Who's the recipient of that, to have received that grant in aid?
I am not a decision maker, and maybe I'll start the response in that way. My recommendation, given the limited budget, is that we start with a nominal fee or a nominal line item of 60,000 in terms of grant to other groups. It's the prerogative of the board to reduce or increase it, but it's a first attempt for a dialogue with regards to the budget. My recommendation is that we develop and provide the board for discussion criteria with regards to how those funds would be allocated in the future.
So in to follow up, if I may, Director Wilson, would that mean that the board, after those terms of reference, essentially the framework established how that would be adjudicated, would those funds then be adjudicated as grants by the board? Or would that be a staff decision? Or would that be a decision of the board whether we adjudicate those grants or they're administered solely by staff?
Before we
Carruthers.
go there, Mr. Chair, if I can just get clarity, the $60,000 includes the Cowichan Watershed Board contribution,
Okay,
plus another $10,000 that would be available for the board's discretion. That's staff's recommendation.
okay. Follow up, Director Wilson?
Yeah, okay, so as long as I've got this clear then, the $60,000 is, I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought here. The $60,000 is what you think we might need, and we would have to decide on it, but it does include the contribution for the Cowichan Watershed Board. And do you know offhand what that contribution is to the Cowichan? How much is left over, basically? 10,000? So 50,000 is what we've got to decide. Oh, 10,000 is right. All righty. Okay, thank you.
And just, and again, this is a transition year, so as the work plan moves through the process and we're consulted and we get recommendations brought back to us, that can be adjusted, as you had said, for the future by this board. Is that what I was hearing from you? Thank you. Did you have another piece?
If I may, certainly when we talked to many of the local communities, they were interested in terms of potential funding to support their activities. And so one of the key discussion points is, do we fund core programs, administrative costs to overhead, or are we funding groups to actually undertake activities in line with the objectives of the program? They're two really different things, and until such time as we have an opportunity to talk to the community, talk to other interests, to have a discussion with the board around their direction and what that larger work plan looks like, it's still too early to be very specific.
Dr. Wilson?
Yeah, this is not a follow-up. This is a different question.
Go
if
ahead,
that's
and then
okay.
I'll resume the list.
Pretty much along the same lines of the previous, with the $102,000 cost of the referendum. If I could get, please, or we could get a breakdown of all the costs of that particular one as well.
Yeah, the resolution, I think, was on both referendums.
Was?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so that's been approved by the board.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Director Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'd like to just sort of zoom out a little bit and look at a question that I think we're indirectly having to look at, and I applaud staff for putting forward a somewhat more modest requisition amount than what was possible. We got authorization to requisition as much as $750,000, and I can tell you that I've had numerous discussions with people, and it's right along the same lines as what happened 10 years ago with the regional parkland acquisition. We went to the electorate, they voted, they approved an amount, and so I've had a number of questions as to, are you going to requisition that amount right out of the gate? And I think that there's broader pressures. There's a number that we get the update before we start the meeting, and then we'll get an update the next time we start a meeting when we're debating budget. And I'm not comfortable with the number where it sits. So I guess from where I'm sitting, I'm thinking, okay, we've got the cap of 750. We've got a recommended requisition of 500,000. I don't know if the question for this committee is that the number, and are we prepared to move forward? Once again, I think I'm going to suggest that I'm not an expert in this field, and that we've got some people that are very well qualified, and they're engaging with people in the community that are engaged in this. So for me, I'm looking at 500,000 is a significant amount of money, but it's quite a ways away from the 750 that we could requisition. I think that this is reasonable, given the fact that there's a lot of pressures elsewhere in our budgets, and I think that this is a number that I'd be comfortable moving forward with, given that first year, we're bridging, we're establishing what the sort of the rules of the game will be. And I think this is a decent number for getting some of the work done that needs to be done, and establishing sort of the foundation of what this function will become in the future. So I wouldn't recommend that we look at adding any dollars to this, and that the number that's at the top of the page on the VADM report is one that I'm comfortable with. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Smith.
Through the chair to staff, I noticed that the total for contract for service and consultants is approximately 135,000. Do you already have ideas of the consultants that you'll be using in contract for service, is my one question to Kate. And then I have one for finance in regards to the allocation for general government, info, technology, human resources, engineering, admin, and building costs. They're all zero right now. How do they fit into this budget?
Oh, right, wrong button. That was it's like a gold star on the question. So, Ms. Miller, if you can answer the first one, and then give staff time to reflect on the second one.
Sure, absolutely. Through you to the director. It's a great question. A portion of that is for the facilitation support in terms of the development and the dialogue at the community level. So there's a chunk of funding set aside for that. When we went to market to get support for rolling out the communication strategy with the referendum, we had the consultant who assisted the RDN with their outreach and the development of their 10-year plan. They gave us a tentative budget to do that work, and it was in the region of 90 to 100,000. And we think that we are so much further ahead than the RDN was years ago, that we've got a lot of community support. So we're comfortable knocking that down to about 40 to 50,000. The remainder of the consulting is really around water quality, water supply kind of components, and developing a strategy there. For example, through a lot of the work that we do at the community level, it's clear to us that the community has skills. So we look at, say, for example, Shawnigan Lake and the work of the science group for Shawnigan Lake, or the research group for Shawnigan Lake. They'd like to do the water quality report for Shawnigan Lake. What we're really asking for is not necessarily a water quality report for Shawnigan Lake, but a strategy that is a CVRD strategy with regards to water quality, objectives establishment. And so we think that either it's a fee-for-service model for the community groups, or it's a consulting direct to a large consulting company. But there's opportunities there to create those larger frameworks. So that's what the money's there for. We do not have staff time in this budget to actually do that work. So
Ms. Miller, also though, those larger consulting pieces would be tendered, right? So
Yes,
there
they
would be
would.
multiple submissions for that, and then those selections would take place based on that scoring criteria.
Yeah.
So no selection yet, because we haven't done the proper transparent tendering process, but through that process, you'd have multiple submissions, hopefully, to do that work.
that's correct.
Thank you.
You
I
want
know-
me to comment on the
I was going to put that piece
allocation
to
piece, or-
finance the
okay.
allocations, or the lack of allocations in those line items.
Through the chair to Director Smith, general government's based on 4.5% of actual expenditures, and it comes in 2 years after those actual expenditures. So you won't see any general government allocation until 2021. And then the other allocations are based on the use of the year previous. So you won't have HR, so you won't have the personnel allocation till next year. You won't have the same for IT for the computers, so there is no allocations in the first year of the service.
So it's just the flow-throughs come through the year following. It's always a trailing piece. Makes sense. Thank you. All right. Seeing no more people on my list, I will call the question. It's been moved and seconded. Mr. Barry? Thank you. All those in favor? And opposed? Directors Kuhn, Acton, Nicholson, and Smith, and Marcotte opposed. The motion passes. Thank you. And moving on, Mr. Barry.
So R13, the draft budget for Function 530, Couch and Flood Management.
So if the committee pleases, do we need a deep discussion on this one, or can Mr. Barry read the resolution?
If I may, this only applies to areas D, E, F, I, North Cowichan, and Duncan.
Thank you. I did see hands, but I didn't get them. Sorry. Mr. Barry, the resolution.
That Function 530, Couch and Flood Management, 2019 draft budget be approved.
Thank you. So do I have a mover and seconder? Moved by Directors Marsh and seconded by Director Staples. Discussion? Director Nicholson.
So I would like to understand what this is compared to the $160,000 that was in the previous 131, I think it was called.
Ms. Miller.
So if I may, this function specifically relates to flood management within the Cowichan system. The money within the 131 budget was through the National Disaster Mitigation Program, and it relates to flood and hazard risk assessment regionally. So Shawnigan Lake, River Bottom Road, the eastern seaboard of the region, and steep slopes across the region. For this year, it also included support to the utilities group for their dam safety assessments.
Thank you. And this was through the granting funding, that other piece as well. Thank you. Director Nicholson.
And that work will be done this year?
We are currently wrapping up the work on the regional flood assessments, the coastal flood assessments, the torrent flow assessment, and the Busy Place Creek assessments. That will be all done by the end of Q1. The upgrade of the Cowichan-Coxsila flood management strategy, or flood management area, and the mapping falls under this function, and that will be wrapped up by next year.
But the overall risk assessment, $160,000, will be finished this quarter.
Yep.
Thank you. And we'd already done the dam assessments, I believe, for Stocking Lake. Yeah, some of the ones that at least I know of in our area. Sorry, did I miss any hands, or do I have just Director Sebring next? Director Sebring.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The one thing that I see that keeps cropping up in these staff reports is legal services increasing from $5,000 to $10,000 to cover legal fees associated with program work. Are we anticipating, I mean, obviously we're anticipating more legal work. What exactly is that about?
Thank you.
We always anticipate legal work, so we want to have that component there, particularly when we're talking about things like increasing risk. For this particular function...
Fair enough, but it's doubling in all these functions, not to interrupt, but that's a fairly substantial increase.
Yep. And so part of it relates to the covenants and the legal arrangements that we have with the rail line, for example, which had to be held in abeyance until the CVRD's parks covenant process concluded. So we'll be concluding that this year. So that's why the increase this year. Yeah.
So registration of covenants or working out issues with existing covenants?
Yes.
Or both?
Both.
Thank you. Thank you. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Unopposed? Motion carries. Mr. Barry.
Moving on to liquid waste. R14, draft budget review for Function 535, Central Sector Liquid Waste Management Plan.
Go through to the recommendation and then we'll have discussion. Simple recommendation.
To be approved.
Thank you. Moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Staples. Question, Director Wilson, and then Director Nicholson, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see there's a 0% increase on this. When One of the things I'm looking at, though, there is decreased consultants' engineering expense. It's still nearly $88,000. What do the consultants actually do for this money? What are they? What is their purpose?
Ms. Miller?
Great question, and it exposes an interesting process that we have in terms of financial process. What we committed to the Central Sector Liquid Waste Management Committee was that we are building basically resources in order to actually go back and refresh the plan. And so we are requisitioning to the maximum amount on an annual basis in order to put money into basically kicking off phase 1 of the Central Sector Liquid Waste Management Plan, likely in 2020. So
I have go ahead.
we
Director Wilson.
have requisition coming in, we put it against a line item, and at the end of the year, we simply roll it into reserve.
Thank you.
Okay, so but just a quick follow-up. So you're basically saving up money into a savings account, basically.
That's correct.
Now, could that be reduced by any amount, or is that a dumb question?
Yeah, we don't want to reduce it.
So, can I just ask a quick question about the legislative requirements? Does this Central Sector Liquid Waste Management Plan, I know municipally we're required on a regular basis to refresh our liquid waste management plans. Does this follow under the same type of regulation?
It does indeed, and in fact, the province has given us a long list of deficits they'd like to see addressed in the refresh of the plan. It's also been quite interesting. I'm sure that the North Cowichan representatives are quite up to speed on the speed of MOE's response. However, they do remind us on a regular basis they expect us to refresh the strategy. So we're anticipating starting it off 2020, 2021, but we're still awaiting the province's feedback on the minor amendment that was completed, 3 years ago now? Yeah.
Thank you. And I just thought that because we've received the same prompting to get back on it because they want to see an updated plan from us as well. Director Wilson?
Yeah, just for my own clarification then, this amount has been allocated or collected for a couple of years so far, and the plan will be put in place in 2020. So once you dig into that savings plan and start spending money, the same amount would still be requisitioned each year for this particular one?
Ms. Miller?
We typically say we'd like to, when you start a process, if you start it with the correct resources, you can typically move through that process fairly quickly. And so the burden in terms of overhead cost, et cetera, is greatly diminished. You also maintain a sense of rapid process through it. We're hoping that a lot of the heavy lifting on the South Sector Liquid Waste Management Plan will have been completed by that point in time in terms of phase 2, and we'll be ready to start the process with the central one. Once the plan is completed and it is sent to the ministry for ministerial approval, the plan is basically finished. What you're really looking at is the next phase, which is a capital implementation program. Sometimes it falls under the same function, but I think more realistically it should follow under a non-planning function but an implementation plan. So for discussion.
Director Nicholson? Thank you. All right, I'll call the question. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Unopposed, motion carries. Mr. Barry?
R15, report from the Manager of Solid Waste Management regarding Function 520, Solid Waste Management Draft Budget.
Deal with these one at a time?
One at a
Let's
time.
take the first resolution.
So the first resolution is the draft budget be approved.
Thank you. It's been a long day, but we either need a resolution or questions for Mr. Warch. Great tie, by the way. You don't look like a new dad. You're too fresh. He just put that shirt on when he got to work, probably.
That's correct. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Director Sebring.
I'll move the resolution, seeing no questions.
Thank you. Seconded by Director Staples, and there come the questions. Director Kuhn, and then Director Smith.
I've seen the solid waste budget increase every year and quite substantially. And it seems every year they're good reasons as to why the increase was. It was the decrease of the Canadian dollar versus the US dollar, and it was all kinds of other reasons. Now it's again a substantial increase. My question to staff is, are there alternatives? Have you looked at alternatives? Is there any possible recommendation that could be made that maybe takes away some of that? Because, I mean, I don't know. It seems like a bottomless pit, this whole thing. And
I was going to say it's exactly what we need. If we had a bottomless pit, the price wouldn't keep going up.
well,
Sorry, but fair question.
Then we'd have other questions afterwards, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I will say before going to Mr. Warich, the I don't know if it's deja vu or a nightmare that keeps recurring, but whenever we dig into solid waste management, it's never cheap. But through to Mr. Warich.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think that's a very valid question through to you. If you allow me just a couple of minutes, I think it's for benefit of everyone. It's good to just go through, just to remind ourselves what are the challenges, what are the opportunities with this budget. So budget 520, obviously providing the regional services. We have recycling centers, 2 of them, and a transfer station, Binks Creek. We get the direction by the approval of solid waste management plan by all of you, and that gives us a direction, that gives us the identification of the level of services that we will provide, and also associated with the budget. So going back into this one, I think solid waste have seen some long years, long history in terms of landfilling in 60s to 70s. Going into the modern technology at that time into incinerators, burning garbage, and this used to be, you know, the best technology at that time. From there on to finding, excuse me, to finding solutions locally about where do we take our garbage to? Within? Do we have landfill here or not? We made a decision, Severity, that we don't want a landfill. So then looking into the modern technologies, so we have been looking into individually and also with the partnerships with the neighboring districts as well. How can we make it business case for having some sort of waste to energy or any other facility that could happen? So in the meantime, we found a landfill in Cache Creek, which was cheaper. Again, so this is a transition of how the dollars are going up. So Cache Creek is cheaper. And then going into Cache Creek could not extend their permit, so had to take our garbage to US. So we've been doing that for over a decade now. We thought that this was a good solution as well because sending garbage at that time was cheaper with US exchange rate, with the rates going up, upward all the time. So just a quick example of our internal costs used to be around $80 to $90. Our tipping fee has remained to $140. So that used to give us the money to run the operation on the other side of it. When the price caught up with the US exchange rate of all the way up to 1.38 or 1.4 and all the way, and then decreasing our garbage because we could not bring more garbage in because we were expensive on $140. Somebody was cheaper, and so we used to lose some of the tonnages. Things have changed, so that has changed just recently. So in 2016, we had a very hard negotiation with the Rabanco company, and we were lucky to get the rates that they gave us in 2009. But it was pretty much a little too much for them because when the time came, December 31st of 2018, this was the end of the contract. And we said, can we negotiate again? And can we be as close to the previous rate? And the answer is no. So when the answer is no, we tried to do the negotiation. So what we did was we went for a request for information. And that is, what technologies are out there? What is it out there? What is it locally, local on the island, in BC, in Canada, or elsewhere? With all of these, we got one option, and that's Rabanco. Rabanco has given us a rate which is upward of $250 US per ton more expensive than it was in December 31st, 2018. Now, why we're talking about these, and that's a very valid question, because I asked that question to myself, because I don't like that, because every time we're looking into a why requisition, why not make it, the best case scenario would be to have it more sustainable. Now, you have a lot of balls juggling, and that is you have recycling items, you have the extended producer responsibilities, EPR, so your electronics, your glass and whatnot. So then you're looking for the markets in terms of metals. Metals used to give us money. All of a sudden, the external market crashed. We still had it in our budget that we're going to make money. We actually lost money. We're paying from the pocket. So all of these external factors that we can't control. So glass, all of a sudden, we were recycling it. Now they're saying you can't recycle it because we don't have a market for that. Wood, we were recycling. Half the wood, they said, if it's contaminated by paint or whatnot, we can't accept it. So line by line items, we've been looking at the efficiencies. But I can assure the board, and some of you, Director Morrison, Director Marcotte, and CAO as well, we're going tomorrow to AVICC meeting. We're hoping for a good news from Comox, and we're hoping that the technology is on the horizon. Can you confirm that? We can't. Whereas you have to find the intermediate kind of solutions, and for now the solution is to go with the new contract with the Rabanco company, continue with that at a very high rate. Just switching side on, just quickly on the other side of it, that is the composting. Now, composting used to be very cheap. It was a open air composting, then became the odor problems, then became the vector problems, and then became all those problems. Now they've gone into technology. Last year, again, coming in 2019 budget, we're looking at yard and garden. We don't charge anything, it's for free. It's a $500,000 cost, just the external, we're not talking internal. $500,000 cost to CVRD, external, with the contract. Rates have increased from $90 to $107 a ton. Is it in our control? No, it was out for bid. So with all of those, and because I have this quick opportunity, and I'd also say these are the risks, and we're trying to mitigate and risk manage it through the budgeting process, through the solid waste management plan. Solid waste management plan identifies all of those, and we're looking into each individual item. What else is a risk to us? What was an opportunity before? Every time you have an asset, that becomes a liability at the end of the day. So we had a landfill. Landfill still, it was closed. We're monitoring it, but one day we're going to have to remediate it. We're going to have to pay for it. Is it coming that far? No, it's coming very close. We have a Coxsala incinerator. We used to have incinerator on the First Nations. I have a meeting on 13th with them. Is that going to go ahead? And we're talking millions of dollars of cost. It's coming. That's a risk that we have on this. But that is so within that, I think what we have in our control is to keep looking for the new markets, keep looking for increasing the revenues, and decreasing the cost of the garbage disposal. And I think we have a good news potentially on the island for the waste to energy, and really looking forward to it, and really working with the other regional districts that it'll become successful. Thank you.
Well, I see why you dress so well. Nothing like delivering bad news in a smart suit. Director Kuhn, did you need a follow-up before I go through, or do you want to ruminate on that for a moment? I feel you. Director Smith, then I have Sebring and Morrison, and Nicholson and Marsh.
Through the chair to staff, where does the Thetis Island fit into this particular budget? And I work over there as a volunteer at the transfer station, and how everything is packaged and put together and brought over. So is it reflected in these numbers here?
Through you, Ms. Chair. No, Thetis Island has a separate budget, so that's not included within 520. However, we support them in terms of education, in terms of providing them with, Thetis Island was once looking for, to manage their recycled BC items. So what we've done is we let them bring their materials to Binks Creek, and then we pay them back for the tonnage money that we receive. So it's still the separate budget. Thanks.
Thank you.
Follow-up, yes, I'm aware that they have their separate budget. I just wanted to see if any of it came in through here.
Thank you. Thank you. Director Sebring.
Thank you,
Got you
Mr.
already, Director Marsh, don't worry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noted with great interest that staff referenced a meeting with AVICC tomorrow. For some of the newbies around the table, could you give us a brief history of what's being considered there? Because that one potentially has some excitement factor for me. I've been saying for more than 10 years that, you know what, if we generate the waste, we should get rid of it rather than fobbing it off to Washington State, or in the old days, Merritt, or wherever that was.
And it only takes a couple of years in local government to get excited about waste opportunities. Mr. Carruthers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'll take this one because I've been I'm probably a little bit more involved than Mr. Weirich has in that subcommittee. We've been functioning for the past 3 years. It was a subcommittee of AVICC, of the regional districts involved in solid waste, to basically look at opportunities for partnership, collaboration on a number of areas, including understanding our waste stream, communicating with our communities. One thing that wasn't identified initially was seeking alternative means of disposing of our garbage. We tackled the low-hanging fruit first. We're meeting tomorrow. One of the things we're going to be talking about is what does the next term of this subcommittee look like? And I think that issue of looking for alternative waste disposal, waste processing technology is going to rise to the top. Mr. Weirich had referred to some emerging technology that Comox Valley is looking at. We were fortunate enough to tour a facility in Halifax in Chester County when we were there. That's a ways off. I don't want to raise expectations that there's something, you know, on the immediate horizon. There's a lot of due diligence that needs to be done. That operation is still not operational yet. There's regulations with the BC Ministry of Environment that it will be an impediment initially, but it is promising. And so we'll be looking at where Comox is at and looking at how we can support each other as regional districts on the island to find some alternative solutions.
Is there any appetite at that table to, rather than each one of us reinventing the wheel, we do it here in the CBRD and Comox does it, that we build one sort of giant processing plant with this new technology, assuming it's feasible?
Yeah, we are. So we've been discussing the CAOs. I've been meeting with the other CAOs on this topic, and we agree that we don't want to be doing it independently to the point where we're offering to support Comox and helping them with their procurement process so that we're in it with them, so that if it turns out that there's opportunities for us, that we're kind of bought into that process. And we would also, it's all based on economy of scale, and it's all based on volume. Yeah. So we could potentially look at divvying the island up in terms of where the masses of solid waste are, that we could look at maybe 2 facilities on the island or 3. But we are going into it shoulder with RDN, ourselves, Comox Valley. We're talking regularly, and we will be actually probably doing some more work with them on this procurement process.
Because even if we truck to Comox, it's still a lot closer than Rabanco.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I have Directors Morrison, Nicholson, Marsh, Yanni DiNardo, and Kuhn. Director Morrison.
Thank you. Yeah, as long as I've been here, I've been hearing the public rather amazed that we send our refuse to Rabanco, and we have we have a director sitting at the table that was around for the garbage wars and the different times of attempting to locate sites within the regional district, and everything that I've heard about those, we don't want to go there. So I hold a lot of hope out for the work that's being done through the AVICC Special Task Force on Solid Waste. And just if there's anybody watching at home, this always, it costs a lot of money, but we're being so much more responsible in regards to what we do with our waste stream and end-of-use items. And there's a few things that were looked at through the solid waste management plan. I'm looking forward to the day that we get to implement some of this, but I don't see a lot of room to move on this, but I do see some light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. I think that when we went to FCM last year and saw some technologies that may work, but I do just want to caution that just in the time that I've been here, there's probably been, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 different groups that have come to stand where Mr. Weirich stands they've pitched their technology, and we haven't seen a lot of these high-tech things proven to work. So I'm comfortable with what they've put forward, and I'm looking forward to opportunities to do something about this long-term. And I just want to make the one note that Mr. Warch has referenced our free yard and garden waste tipping. And we have, as a board and previous boards, made conscious decisions that we want our residents to have that opportunity to be supported and subsidized. It's a flat-out subsidy through tax dollars, so that people aren't taking things from their yards, which may include invasives and who knows what else, and taking it out into the bush. We've still got lots of people that are doing that, but obviously there's some success in knowing that their yard and garden waste can go to the transfer station and be dealt with appropriately. And I'm still supportive of that being within the budget the way it is, and not going to charging a tipping fee for that. So I just wanted to go on record for that. Thank you.
Thank you. I remember at one time, incinerators were seen as a great new technology to environmentally sensitive way to get rid of garbage, and it really came back. So, those concerns are well-founded. I've got Director Nicholson, then Marsh, then Kuhn to close.
I have two questions. One is about reserves. So I am concerned about things like the incinerator, and are we putting enough money away in our reserves to deal with these things?
Through to you, Mr. Chair, and I've got the finance gurus here who can support me on this one. So the operation that we have of $8 to $9 million of an operation with the risk, I think we don't have. If I was looking into the policy, I think if our 1 month expenditure is about $660,000. So if you look at the 2 months policy, we're looking at $1.3 million. That should be. It's not. So if that is the simple answer from that end. Having said that, there's another comment about, we just talked about the remediation of the historic sites. Mm-hmm. We do put a little bit of money per ton into the remediation fund, which is not enough. It's like $30,000, $40,000 a year, which is not going to be enough.
Thank you.
Right, so I think that's a real problem. And I recognize there's huge requisition pressures here, but, we're just pushing the problem down the road.
And I think that, some of the concern around that would be a requirement to borrow the funds when the time comes. And then the debt servicing may be a less painful pill to swallow in one gulp, but the comment is well placed and well founded in the reality that we face around those historical sites. Yep.
So my other question is a little question. When I was looking at the Peerless Road drop-off depot, what is R&M Buildings Grounds? And why did it jump up from 10 to, or it went way up to 27,000 from 10,000 last year?
Through to you. So it's a repair and maintenance, the normal for
Oh, yeah,
Peerless.
okay.
So since we built a new facility, we didn't have the landscaping done. So when you see all these small little trees and shrubs and shrubs all over the place, this is for the maintenance for that.
So we're going to do fancy maintenance this year, okay.
Well, maintenance of the asset we already put in. This somehow goes back to the sports field conversation. Build it and then they will come, but you will also pay to maintain it. Thank you, Mr. Warch. And having done landscaping, that's not very much money for an annual budget on a site of that size. So hopefully they do a decent job. Director Marsh, and then Director Kuhn to close.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I find this conversation kind of depressing, The last, I don't know how many years we've talked about reduce, reuse, recycle, and the community farm store put out a really cool thing on Facebook, take your jars and buy your things. And I forwarded it to my Facebook people, and someone said, yeah, but what about refuse? And I think that's a thing that maybe we need to start thinking about as a culture. I myself did, and I drive a Prius. I'm pretty green. I grow a lot of food. but I did the how many planets, what's your footprint? And I was shocked to find out my lifestyle is 1.7 planets. I've flown once in the last 25 years. So it's kind of shocking and scary. But what I wanted to know a bit was about the $500,000 for the yard and garden waste. Because I'm thinking of, I'm just thinking of this kind of crunch that's happening. People can't afford to buy good food, so they're buying cheap food, which is in packaging, which then we're paying for to dispose of the packaging. I'm just thinking, what about at North Cowichan we funded, I think it was North Cowichan, or did we do it here? An agricultural lending library where people, yeah, it was in North Cowichan. Is there any thought, if we had a lending library of sorts for chippers, say, for instance, and perhaps if we did some kind of a bulk buy for compost, I compost, but I'm looking into buying one of those ones that goes like this, because, it takes me a year to get my compost because I'm not turning it properly and all of that kind of stuff. But what about if we just started looking at ways that people would do a more permaculture thing on their property? So we have moved to, you've got to deal with your own stormwater now on your property, and you've got to make sure you have a system that doesn't add to the stormwater system. Well, is it at time maybe to start looking at if you're going to own a property, and I don't know the answer to this, but, you got to deal with what happens on that property on your property. And that's just a question that I have, because I think not just to save our budget, but to save our planet or to save our environment, to make it so that we can function. So just a question, if that's something that's ever been considered, because I would certainly be interested in doing that.
Mr. Warch.
Through to you, Mr. Chair, and wonderful question again. So I think as part of our solid waste management plan, approved by you, and it's pending final approval by the ministry. So one of the strategies is to reduce the food waste. And within that, we're looking at all options available. We have recently joined with Ministry of Environment for their program Love Food, Hate Waste. And Cowichan Green Community, we're working with them. And we're looking at all the options because one of our goal and objective is to reduce that 40% of that food waste that is being wasted. How can we utilize it to the nth level? Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll go to Director Kuhn to close, and then it might be appropriate for us to take a short break. Director Kuhn?
That contract we have with Robaco, can it be cancelled? And are we signing up a new 10-year contract, or what kind of contract are we signing up to?
Mr. Warch.
Through to you, Ms. Chair. So this contract, we've looked at it as part of the bid, open bid. And since that is the only available option at this moment to take your garbage to, I wouldn't recommend to cancel it. We have looked into other options. There's none available. Now,
No, my fear is, can they cancel? If they have suddenly a whole different environmental view down there, can they say, well, sorry, we won't take your stuff anymore? And I guess in that case, we'd be up the creek. So that's the concern I have.
Hopefully we don't dump our garbage while we're there, but up the creek, but Mr.
So,
Warch.
so as everything, through to you, Ms. Chair. Thank you. Wonderful question again. And I think because our business is about, calculating risk mitigation, management, so we have looked into it. Number one, they have to give us some sort of and I can't remember if it's 6 months, we're trying to put the language in for 6 months notice, and it's either way, we can exit. But on the other side of it, other things can happen. There could be weather restrictions because we're barging, it goes on rail and everything else. So we have a contingency agreement with the Regional District of Nanaimo. We also have doubled up with our contingency by having a contract with Waste Management. So in terms of, because our bins can only take about 7 days, so we have windstorm last time. So we were sort of loaded and we had to get rid of the garbage. So what do you do with that? So we brought in Waste Management. So we have two-prong risk management approach for that one.
Okay, I guess,
follow-up.
if that did happen, you have a plan, and what would we do with the stuff? Okay. Can we dispose on the island? No, we can't.
Well, I think, as you said, the backup are with Waste Management and the RDN for backup, but those would be limited scope. I know that around biosolids management, for example, the town has agreements with Comox Valley Regional District as a backup should our solution have a failure or inability to take that waste. So we have similar as part of the solid waste management plan.
Absolutely, and if I can add, Mr. Chair, and that is we had a very long meeting with Cache Creek people. They're having some difficulty in getting their final approvals. We were actually hoping that they will bid for it, then they will actually get this contract because it'll be cheaper for us to haul. They could not give us the absolute date that they can start, but we have a feeling that within the next 6 months or so, they will be available. Answering your second part of that question was, because it's expensive to deal with Rebanco at this moment, so we didn't go for full 5 years. So we have 3 years, and then we are looking into extension if everything is agreeable for both parties.
And just for clarity, there is some kind of a sunset clause that you could activate in that contract to, if, say, somebody like Cache Creek came online and there was, yeah, I just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you. All right, so we do have moved and seconded, Mr. Barry. Thank you all. I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. So that was number one. Number two is the supplementary request. Mr. Barry.
Mr. Chair, do you want to do that now or the break?
Do you want to have the break? I think we need a break. My back is super sore from sitting. That's how out of shape I am. All right, we'll take just a quick 5-minute recess if we can, and then we can get through the rest of it. Thank you. If we can get the directors back to our seats, we'll try and get you out of here at a reasonable time this evening. Well, I would say that considering the workload we had today, I think we're doing quite well, and I would like to compliment the committee on good discussion and you know, a trying process always, but you know, we're at a municipal level, I know we're all going through budgets as well, so it's never an easy time of year. Feels like we've been on a 3-month stretch of endless days and nights, but look forward to, sorry, Director Marcotte, thank you for that colorful input. All right, so we do have quorum at the table, so I think it's suitable to resume. Mr. Barry.
We're still on R15, that's Function 520, Solid Waste Management, and there's a supplemental request, and the recommendation is that the Tier 2 supplementary request for a regular full-time facility leader 1 be approved.
Thank you. Through to Director Wilson, question?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
I'll start off by saying I'm not in favour of this one. Because I'm reading the supplemental recycling facility leader there, and I'm seeing things like health and safety requirements. As I recall, we had a presentation or a request to employ a full-time health and safety inspector, and yet we've got this here. Customer service, meal breaks. I don't see any real meat here at all, the need for an extra staff member. So I'm not in favour of this one at all.
Thank you. If you'd like to respond, Mr. Warch, I would say this is a Tier 2 supplemental request, so, you know, with that perspective on it, Mr. Warch, maybe don't defend it too hard, but give us your honest assessment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and through to you. I think it's a very valid question, but if you allow me to just explain what it is, and that might help. I think one of the also thing would be helpful that, you know, we invite you as a board to go to all three facilities. That'll be helpful to see what are the challenges out there. Now, Meat Creek is a brand new facility we completed just last year. And before that, it used to be a very small facility, the older facility where you have the scale shack, and right in front of you, people are, here's the garbage, so there were like 4 bins there. So we're in a business where you need to have a very clean roll-off, whichever material that you're looking at, otherwise it's not marketable. Now the scale is too far, so that you need 1 person to the scale. If the second person is not on the floor and directing people and educating people what they need where, it's not gonna help. It is going to end up with more effort to clean up than to have a preventative action. That's number 1. Number 2 thing is that once they're ready, you need to prepare the new bags, new roll-off, and everything else. So you need a second person there. All of these things that you read, they are the secondary things. Health and safety is paramount. It's important. Health and safety is also important because that person is all by himself or herself. So you need a second person there. But most important for us is that the management of when the truck comes in, goes through the scale, and then goes to drop off their material, whether it's yard and garden. So let me give you a health and safety example. If the person goes through truck from the scale house cannot see where yard and garden is. So if the yard and garden person goes in with a pickup truck and somehow ends up in the roll-off bin, that person's not seeing it. Other thing can happen is nowadays technology. You can have the cameras and everything else, but within the cameras and dealing with 2 customers and everything else, you're gonna miss it. That's why we're thinking, because it's a bigger facility, because we need clean materials, because we need the management of these materials, it's pretty much essential that you have 2 people.
Yes.
And you feel that this is necessary to have a full-time person there?
Through to you, Mr. Chair, and that's also a wonderful question. So when we talk about full-time, that full-time, all the hours he or she will not be at Mead Creek. We were facing with other challenges, that's why you see 80% and 20% rule. So the challenge we're having, a similar challenge at Bings Creek. That is what we're having with the Recycle BC materials. When people come in, we have a residential area where people are supposed to leave their paper and all of those Recycle BC items. So that wasn't being cleaned. So we were getting, from Recycle BC that you need to have, and they were saying as per our contract. So they want us to have somebody full-time present there. So we were thinking that we will use 20% of the time to educate people on the Recycle BC and at Bings Creek. So that is the distribution of that person.
Sorry, and, is there at least at a high level some reflection that you can provide us on the lost revenue that comes from contaminated materials? So through Recycling BC, when we have a clean load, if you will, if it's contaminated with, either inappropriate materials mixed in, we don't get the revenue opportunities out of that waste, if you will.
Absolutely correct.
Okay. So just for clarity, did you just say that at Meads Creek, as it is, Mead Creek, there's only 1 person on?
That's correct.
Wow. So again, we build a new facility and guess what? You gotta run it. Thank you. Director Yanni DiNardo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess when you build it and now it's just never ending, I guess. It's just that our requisition is it's gonna be so high this year. Is there any way that we could borrow somebody from, or shift around people from Bings or Peerless? I understand that 1 person is really not practical for safety anyway, besides what could happen with the garbage being all messed up, with the recycling being messed up. So is there any way that we can adjust with other facilities?
So through to you, Mr. Chair. So good question, and unfortunately, if you look at the total number of hours, that is the addition of hours now, what you need as a second person. So we can have other people because there are some part-timers, there are some casual people, we can get them there. But our wages in 520, they will go up. So either this way or that way. It's more hours means more wages at the end of the day.
I think you have Director Morrison and then alternate Director Ryan. After Director Morrison. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is one of those that I was kind of waffling on a little bit. And I've been to the site. I've seen it's a significantly bigger. And prior at the old site, one person could manage pretty effectively that, but I think they had to close down at lunchtime and the like, so. But I think you're making a compelling argument because one of the things that we're going to have to address, and I'll relate back to my Friday afternoon in July visit and to see my area's recycling come in, but I just know the nature of people when they go to Bing's, you go through the scale house, you go to where you're going, and there's somebody there making sure that you're not getting contamination in the wrong bins. And we can't be having the material that's coming in from either Peerless or Meads causing contamination in our waste stream. So I think I've come to a place where this is something that we need to do. Knowing the site, I think we need to get directors out to see some of these facilities, and you'll understand how one person on that site, when it's open for business, just simply doesn't cut it.
Thank you, Director Morrison, and I've got you on the list. I would say too, even with that, we've had issues with contamination with that oversight at Peerless and Bings Creek, with people still, when somebody's not looking or there to sort of assist them. I've been there myself, so they caught me and I didn't know that there was the wrong kind of styrofoam, but it's not always styrofoam is the same. If it's flexible, it doesn't go. Director Ryan. And then I've got Director Acton and Director Sandu. Thank you. Director Ryan.
Hey, thank you very much. Yeah. So this might be a bit of a naive question, but you're saying the additional person will help reduce contamination, right? So they'll be essentially a moneymaker. So have you factored that into the additional cost? Like, there's going to be an offset, right?
So through to you, Mr. Chair. So we have a best case scenario that is this is how much tonnage you have and that's how much we're going to get. So that is part of your revenue. That is the best case scenario we have. So if you have contamination, we're going to have less revenue.
Yeah. Yeah. So this person's going to decrease contamination, so revenue should go up, right? So have you factored that increased revenue to offset part of the salary, or?
And that's what I'm saying. So we
Okay.
we have looked into that high level of revenue to start with. We're
Yeah.
assuming that everything will be clean, or clean as to humanly possible clean. But if we don't have it, then there's contamination, then the value will go down. But value is not the only thing. That is how you clean up, how you keep managing the site, how you have a health and safety because you're dealing with public. There's going to be people, there's going to be traffic.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just maybe a comment and a question. My understanding was that Tier 2 was not a urgent thing, that management had put things aside and decided that 1 is kind of something we can't not go with. And then my question is to finance, since we've already passed some of those large new referendum numbers, do you have a number as to where we are so far of our regional requisition increase? Requisition increase.
Through to staff.
We've not calculated in any of the decisions made today. And at the last 2 Recreation Commission meetings, I just haven't had time to get those in yet. So everything else is in, and we're currently at 5.79. Yeah.
Thank you. Director Sandu. And then Yanni DiNardo.
As somebody who uses the Meads Creek, I've seen people that do not want.
Director Sandu, microphone. Just make sure your red lights.
For somebody, a resident of Lake Cowichan, is that when I've gone up there to the old site and then the new site, is people now are there, they don't want to separate their stuff. And then, so if you don't have somebody walking along down there, and I've seen that firsthand, people are just shoving whatever because they just think that, well, they're not going to know it's me type of thing. And then it's going to be your job to, as you say, what you have to do. So we are still getting garbage dumped on side roads and whatnot. And so it's about also educating people down below. So when people are coming to dump, is that they have direction and they have a face, not just one person at the scales, because one person can't be at the scale and then also be down at the site at the same time. It's an impossible job. We're open 3 days a week up there, and I think it warrants, if we want people to educate people to properly recycle and that, we have to have the manpower to do it. So I think this is a good move, maybe it's a costly move, but I think it's an important move for the future.
Thank you. Director Yanni DiNardo, and then Director Marsh.
Thank you. It's just difficult on other positions. Positions are hard because they're forever. And a pilot or a temporary position wouldn't work out for this? Or no? Okay.
Director Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that whenever I hear liability, if we're not staffed up, I'm reminded of the $130,000 penalty that North Cowichan had to pay because of WorkSafe, a problem. And I think that this is asking for something like that if we don't do it properly. If you're going to build a facility, you need to staff it so it's safe for the staff that work there and the public that participate. So, I mean, it's not easy to sit in these chairs, but I think we have to pay for what we're doing. We have to do it well. If we're going to do something, we might as well be doing it well, or we shouldn't be doing it at all. So I do support it, although it's not easy, but I do.
Thank you. Director Smith.
My understanding is that this is a new facility, and that with new facilities, you have growing pains, and teaching people is a huge part of ensuring that the contamination is not there. Is there an opportunity to do a blitz of, say, 2 months, 3 months, maybe 4 months of the staff being there, the additional person being there for that education, and other people from the waste management, solid waste management, being there for that period of time? And the reason I say this is working at the Thetis Island Recycle Depot, we touch everything. And one of the things is if it's dirty or it needs to not come, we see the person right there and then, and we hand it back to them and say to them, can you take this back home and please wash it? Or we try to educate them and bring them up to it. And it's a learning process. So you pick one sort of thing that you want to work on, and you just work on that and educate the people in that direction for a while, and then move to the next thing. So is there a possibility of sort of like a 4-month education process to work on this?
Mr. Arch.
Through to you, Mr. Chair. Excellent question, and I was actually thinking about just a scenario with me having kid at the back and bringing out some recyclables and some garbage and everything else, and you're trying to throw something, responsibly, and then kids crying, then the car started, so I have 2 more bottles to just throw. Let's throw it all out at once. But so we're human beings, so it's a continuous process of education. We have education on the other side of it that is happening. So it will happen regardless of this one. We have that happening as part of Recycle BC contamination level. We're reaching out to the community. Having said that, at the recycling centers, if you go there every day, every day is different. Every day our public is different. They're in different moods. On a rainy day, people behave differently. On a sunny day, people behave differently. So I think just having those 2 eyes there, and then number one, directing the traffic. This is where you need to be at roll-off bin. This is this bin you need to be. One of the examples of that contamination that we're talking about, cardboard is a cardboard. So cardboard has a different value when it's dry. Cardboard has a different value when it's wet. When it's wet, it has no value. So who's there to tell somebody, like, hey, listen, this is wet, it's not gonna make sense, or don't do it this way or that way. So there's a lot of, it's a continuation of education. That is the person that is on ground. And then my apologies if I'm, defending on this side of it a little too much, because I understand where you're coming from with all those big budget items. But we all have seen that at the recycling centers, that education is a continuous thing which will go for years. In 2 or 3 months, we will not be able to educate people fully.
Thank you. I guess, just for clarity, you mentioned that you were at this center on Thetis Island. How long has it been in operation for? So if that education is still going on today, has that just been a 3 or 4 month process, or has it been going on for years?
Every time there is a regulation change, then
Then do the education piece.
everybody who comes, we work with each person to say, we've had changes, and plastic category 2 can now be here. And then, so we educate them that they can bring it, and then we educate them that how we sort it.
Okay.
So, and right now, was a high contamination of the milk cartons, the Tetra cartons. So we educated people to cut them, open them, and make sure. So when the contamination was noted, that there was an issue, so we do work to
Keep people up to date on the
keep them
changing
up to date when there's
regulations.
a change. Like if your contamination is
So-
your milk, is your Tetra
Yeah,
containers, then how do you solve that?
yeah, I get it. Thanks. So regulations do change all the time, which would then sort of necessitate an ongoing educational piece that would be changing every time the regulations change. I've got Director Staples, Kuhn, and Acton, and then hopefully we can call the question.
Thank you. My question is about liability to the regional district if there's only one employee there, because as just, I mean, not only safety to the employee, but safety to the people who are coming to the facility. Again, thinking to my kids in the back seat, you know, or people going up to bings, people drop lids and all sorts of stuff. So that to me would be a pretty large risk to the organization if we don't have a set of eyes where people are actually sorting their garbage, because there is a lot of materials that can harm people. So that, and I recognize what people are saying about this is hard to, you know, Director Ian DiNardo, this is a hard thing to take, like you said, but for the safety reasons for staff, for the community, for the, you know, for the facility itself, I don't know that we can only have one person without opening up a whole bunch of possibilities.
Thank you. So this is the list that never ends. Directors Kuhn, Acton, and then back to Yanni DiNardo. And Marsh.
How does the volume in Mead Creek compare to Bing's and the number of employees?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You're testing my on-the-spot knowledge. We're about 18 people at Binks Creek, and we go through about 80,000 customers at Binks Creek. We go through about 15,000, less than 15, but around 15,000 at Mead Creek. And we used to have one person. Now we're asking for 2. But
What about Peerless? I think that may be a
Peerless
more,
is about 25 to 30,000.
and how many people out there? Because there's definitely more than 2 people there every time I go.
We usually have a minimum of 2, but
Yeah.
there's usually 2 to 3.
Yeah. All right. Continuing on, Director Acton.
My question is to upper management. How come it was this was labeled as a tier 2 item? What was your rationale?
Mr. Crothers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like Mr. Wirch, putting me on the spot, without having to see the whole batch of supplementals, I can't speak. It was, you know, it's a tough call for us, and particularly when we know the challenges that the board is under in terms of budget pressures. So we were very diligent in making sure that the tier 1s that we put forward were absolutely critical. That's not to say that the tier 2s are not important and don't have risks associated with them. And in hindsight, listening to Mr. Warich and listening to the presentation today, I might argue that we should have ranked it as a tier 1, quite honestly. You know, as your administrator, I have to be honest with you. These are the things that scare me, because I'm the one that ends up wearing it. When there's a WCB claim or we end up having something happen, it goes up the food chain to the CAO, basically, in terms of compliance with regulations and all the rest of it. You guys have a role, and obviously in terms of establishing policy and budget. But you know, when I look at that facility and I look at having one person managing a facility like that with a number of moving parts and the people coming through, I'm concerned. And like I say, I would suggest that maybe we erred in not having it as a tier 1.
Thank you. Director Yanni DiNardo.
That was exactly my question, because I'm hearing now liability and this and that, but I see tier 2, so that was why I was wondering, but.
Thank you. Director Marsh.
Yeah, I think it might be redundant to say it, but it seems to me if you have a report that says that you need this because of potential liability and you don't do it, then if and when the worst thing happens, you know, it's not going to go well. I don't think we have an HR person in the room, but I know what our HR person would say. We need to fund this. We might not like it. We might have to plug our nose to do it, but we would be putting people, either employees and/or citizens, at risk by not doing so, and also the liability of costing a fine from WorkSafe, or who knows what could happen, but I don't really think we have a choice.
Thank you. I'm just going to, and again, committees feel free to go as long as you want, but if we're repeating things and relitigating points that have already been made, I just suggest that we don't need to do that. If the words have been heard through another director's perspective and we agree with them, it's been said at the table, and I'd like to call the question soon, but now I have Directors Sandhu, Wilson, and Smith again.
Just a question of what's the protocol for when you have one staff at Meads Creek, like for safety, like call-in? They have to call in and whatnot. Am I correct on that?
Mr. Warwick.
Through Mr. Chair. So this is it. You know, we were just waiting for this budget to ask for another person. We don't really normally operate with one person. Even when somebody goes for water monitoring, we try to send with 2 people. This area, because there's equipment involved as well, you know, it's a little bit risky. But what protocol is, if God forbid something happens, we're 15, 20 minutes away from somebody from Peerless or somebody from Bings Creek. We'll meet with them. We all have cell phones 24/7 anyway, so it's doable. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Wilson, and then Director Smith to close. Director Sebring after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to what you just said, the Bings Creek has 18 employees, and this is very rough figures, I appreciate that. And what's the tonnage you were talking about, very roughly?
So, putting me on spot. Thank you for the chair.
And
Good
I've
question.
got-
So we're looking at around CVRD through our facilities. We manage and process somewhere between 35,000 and 40,000 tons collectively
Per year?
per year. And which is, I would say, about 80% is Bings Creek, and about 10 to 15% is Peerless, and the rest is Mead.
Okay, and Mead, how many tons was there, do you think?
I would just make up. I'd probably say 10 to 15% out of 35,000.
So tonnage, what I'm trying to work out here, you see, is very roughly, at Bings Creek, you've got 18 people with 60, let's call it 60,000 tons.
Yep.
Their average per man of taking care of that is much. I don't see why we can't transfer even one person away from that, because the ratios just don't match up here. The ratios of man per ton at Bings is far less than what you're talking about at Mead. I don't see why we can't transfer one or maybe even 2 people across from Bings to equalise the amount of tonnage per man, which is being processed.
Mr. Warwick,
Through to you, Mr.
I think I could explain that one, but
Yeah,
go
but
ahead.
let me take a first crack, and maybe you can help me out. So we're looking at full-time. We're looking at full-time employees, and I'm just saying 18 people. It may be 20, but 18 people. But then you have vacation, then you have sick times, and all of those things. All that involved on-ground people. When they're there, you're looking at a transfer station compared to a recycling facility. Recycling facility, somebody's just going to bring in. At a transfer station, you're looking at organic materials. Organic material, somebody's actually working on with the roll-off, somebody's working on with the excavator, somebody's working on with putting the stuff into the container, tying those. So that's a whole different animal, transfer station. But I think, and I see where you're coming from. So I think what we talked about it from health and safety and from the accessibility point of view, going back to one of the principles of solid waste plan and how we came about with what we came about, some of the, some areas, regional districts within BC and Canada, when you go to school, they actually teach you, 50,000 people, one recycling facility is good enough. But that doesn't take care of your geographic situation, how wide you are and how big you are. Now, we're looking at a best-case scenario where you're looking at a facility for most residents, not for all, most residents, you're within 15, 20 minutes away from a recycling center. So it's more of a level of service that you're providing. Otherwise, we say, why one people, why even two people? Close Mead Creek, bring them to Binks Creek. It's only 20 minutes more. But that's a convenience. When you're looking at convenience and level of service that you want to provide, then you want to provide a service that is health and safety, that is manageable, that is doable business-wise. So that's why I think the argument is that you need to have a minimum of two people working at the same time, not related to the tonnages, how it processes. Thanks.
Thank you, and I'll go to Director Smith to close, hopefully.
So through the chair, Peerless is only open 2 days a week right now, is that correct? 3. So, and how many days is Mead Creek open? 3. And they rotate. So can the staff from Peerless
Then
on
they
the
create the
3
situation.
3
that
days that they're not working
That's what
at Mead go there?
Mr. Warge can explain how they work with that staff. They do already work between facilities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
It's a full-time equivalent position that we're talking about, but those people do work throughout the system at the different facilities.
That is exactly right. So whoever's working on Wednesday or Saturday, you're looking at, okay, so at Binks Creek, because of wind problem, now we have traffic all the way to highway. Did anybody hear that? That was the actual case the first time, all the way to the line up to the highway. Now I need a traffic controller. Now I need this many people at Scalehouse. So we look at the workload. If I give example, last time we had some free tipping at Mead Creek. That's at a recycling. That's at the satellite facility. So whole town showed up, bumper to bumper. How many people do you need? So we have full-time people. We have a pool of people. We deploy them. You have regular jobs for them to do, and then you need some more. So that's where you get the part-timers and casuals, and then as needed, you bring them in. I think what we're talking about is the bulk wage cost. So our cost is this much. What we're saying here is that our cost is going to increase. 2 is look at it is having a full-time people there, or bringing in somebody casual or part-timer. If you keep doing that for the same time, the wages at a certain level, you're still paying all of this thing, why not have it permanent?
Thank you. Director Morrison.
I'll move that item.
Thank you. Can I get a seconder? Director Sandu. We've had fulsome discussion in both definitions of the word fulsome. All those in favor? Opposed? Directors Ryan, Wilson, and Smith opposed. The motion carries. And I think if I can read through my chicken scratch here, where are we, Mr. Barry? I had such a long speakers list, I went over the next couple of items.
R16, the asset coordinator report, draft budget review for asset management function 571, and a recommendation that the budget be approved.
Hope you're fresh, because we are.
Yeah, frosty, Mr. Chair.
Or a little punchy, or a little ornery, whatever you're ready for. We could give you something you're not ready for. Through to the committee, if you have questions before we move a resolution. I don't see any. Mr. Barry, the resolution. You already read it. Thank you. Do I have a mover and seconder? Moved by multiples. I'll take Director Nicholson and Director Marsh because they were quickest on the draw. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much for staying with us. And to our board, if we want to talk about overtime costs, one of our staff has been waiting patiently for his opportunity to speak, and we've been paying overtime, and we didn't utilize him. Management. Oh, no overtime. He's in management now. Poor guy. You didn't get that when you took that position, did you? All right, Mr. Barry.
On R17, Mr. Chair, Director Staples would like 2 items pulled.
Thank you. Which items are those? 9 and 10, I believe?
Yes, 9 and 10.
So we'll deal with the other items, and then you can declare your conflict after we've dealt with those items. So
Thank
we're
you.
dealing with items 1 through 8, and then 11 and 12, Mr. Barry?
Correct,
Thank you.
and this is for the grant function for nonprofit organizations.
What's the pleasure of the committee? Did you want to deal with the block of those ones with the 2 pulled?
Let's
Thank
do
you.
an omnibus, yeah.
Thank you. Do we need them read by Mr. Barry? We got movers and seconders. Moved by Director Morrison, seconded by Director Yanni DiNardo. Discussion on that block. Director Wilson.
No. Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are some very good societies and worthwhile societies which fully deserve the support in here. My concern is, again, as I've pointed out before, is transparency and accountability. Do we get financial oversight? Do we get the proper financial reports from these? And who has got responsibility for looking at those and making sure?
So I know there's 2 levels to that. I can speak for the theater from Ladysmith. They come and present to the board sort of an activity update, and I know they do provide a report that goes through with that package. But I think the theater pieces for like the couch and theater is slightly different, so I don't know if staff can comment on those. There we
All
go.
of the organizations do submit their financial information and their reports every year. It is shared with all of the directors who are participants in each of the functions. We also publish it all on our website.
Thank you. Further discussion, seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Okay, Director Staples.
Okay, so one of them is the organization that I'm currently still working at, Social Planning, and the other one is, if we go way back to this morning, it's the Couch and Women Against Violence Society again, so.
Okay, thank you. All right, now that we've moved on with Director Staples out of the room, moved by 9 and 10, moved by Director Sebring, seconded by Director Marsh. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed? Motion carries. Sorry, Director Toporowski, if I had seen you, I would have got you on the record, but I just was looking down that side at the time. So I think Director Staples can return.
Director Staples can return, yes.
All right, Mr. Barry, R18. We're almost there, folks.
R18 from the Assistant Manager of Finance, draft budget for function 150, municipalities MFA debt.
No, that's a flow-through function. Thank you. Director Morrison moved, seconded by Director Marsh. Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed, motion carries. R19, Mr. Barry.
From the Asset Coordinator, Engineering Services regarding the asset management policy.
Thank
And
you.
There's a recommendation.
If you can read those out for us.
If you approve the new policy, this is actually kind of backwards here. If you approve the new policy,
Then we would repeal the
then
new
you'll
policy.
repeal the previous one.
Okay, thank you. Director Morrison is going to ask you a question, just so, and then Director Nicholson.
Make it worth your time. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm caught a little unawares. I didn't know this was coming forward. I knew that we had an asset management policy. I'm just not particularly familiar with it. I did read the document, which seems like it was 2 weeks ago, but it was just Sunday. Is this a policy that we need to have amended for any particular time pressure or program we're applying for or anything like that? Because I don't know that I'm comfortable enough with it to say, you know, let's just fly at her and go ahead.
Great question, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. There's a, I guess, the asset management policy is really just setting the, translating the strategic objectives of the CBRD into the developing an asset management program for the organization. Part of that is a continuous improvement. So the asset management policy will be should be reviewed regularly regardless of any other considerations. But in this particular case, we have received FCM funding to refresh this policy to include the climate change and sustainability lens to the policy, which is in there. And so a board-approved policy was kind of the deliverable that we need to close off the program and get the funding for that.
Thank you. Mr. Itami. He's been waiting too, so he got up once and he didn't get a chance to get to the microphone, so.
But the reason for that, you know, you may think that we are rushing that, but we need that as a kind of supporting document for our
Other grant application.
grant application. So that's what.
Remember when they keep telling us they won't give us grants unless our asset management is in line? This is part of that process, I believe. Thank you.
May I
Yep,
make
yep.
one more comment, sir? Just so I know, we've spent a lot of time collecting the information needed to put together our asset management plan, and it's all starting to come together, I think, in this year. The policies has been established at the next Regional Services Committee meeting. I'm hoping to be able to do a bit of a deeper dive into like what asset management is and why it's important. And then also the state of the infrastructure report should be on the agenda, which will, again, dive into some of the work we've been doing around condition assessments for CBRD infrastructure.
Thank you. I have Director Nicholson and then Sebring. No, okay, I was gonna say, and Director, okay. Director Nicholson.
I was just wondering why drainage systems, fleet, infrastructure, flood management, and natural capital aren't part of this at this time, and when will they be?
Well, great question. Through you, Mr. Chair. We have a limited capacity to even understand the infrastructure that we're currently managing. And so we prioritized the asset systems that have readily available data was for most of the things. So everything will be included as our asset management program evolves. We were again focusing primarily on engineered infrastructure first that we have more control over, and then once we have that sort of more defined, we would then move on to the natural capital.
Thank you.
Thank you. I believe the province is doing work around guidelines for natural capital asset valuation and stuff as well, because I know that a lot of municipalities that we've passed resolutions, I believe at UBCM, for some guidance, because it is a difficult piece to quantify, and if we're all making up what we feel those assets are worth, it kind of makes that evaluation worthless. So hopefully we can engage with the province on those guidelines as we move forward. Director Sebring.
I'll pass my question.
Thank you. Have we have it moved and seconded, Mr. Barry? No, Director Morrison's going to move it. It's going to be seconded by Director Marsh. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Mr. Barry.
There's nobody in the audience for question period?
Mr. Itami, did you want to ask any questions before we go?
Not tonight.
Okay. And Mr. Barry, no closed session?
Nope.
So I'll ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Director Marcotte, seconded by Director Toporowski. All those in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all again for, no, it was a long